You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former Hinckley Institute of Politics Director Kirk Jowers and former Salt Lake City Councilman Charlie Luke. Gentlemen, glad to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Too bad we don't have anything to talk about, huh?
Yeah, it's a boring week.
Yeah, let's jump right into it. The SCOTUS vacancy. The question, will Republicans get the confirmation through before Election Day? Kirk, let's start with you.
They can, and so they probably will, but it is with some peril, of course. We've watched this on all levels with the U.S. Senate. You can put the blame on Harry Reid starting it, or go back a little bit on the Republican, but they just keep upping the ante, changing the rules, changing traditions, and so one bad turn will always get another, and so they've got to be prepared for that. At some point, there's got to be some fundamental changes because there's just no way one party's going to take the hit and just let it pass.
Boy, yeah. That is a good point, and I want to dig into future consequences a little bit more, but do you believe they will indeed push it through before Election Day?
I believe they will. The Democrats do have some kind of parliamentary tricks they can try to use, but again, Harry Reid did some things which makes it pretty easy for the Republicans to throw those aside that they could not have a decade ago. So yeah, if they want it, they can get it. The only thing that could really undo it is if the person they choose has some skeletons that are worse than Republicans know about, and it kind of comes up and it requires a much more thorough vetting, which pushes that very tight timeline just a little too far.
Yeah,
hey, Charlie,
I agree.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Absolutely. I think that the Republicans will do that, and I think it's unfortunate. But Kirk brought up some very good points. The issue right now is it goes beyond Trump. It goes beyond McConnell. Where we are right now is not a good place. The reason that this country has been as successful as we have been, and that we've, in terms of having a democratic republic, survive as long as we have, is because we have had that direct separation of powers, and unfortunately that is disappearing. Politicians are rewarded for being polarizing. They're rewarded not for crossing the lines. The days of Hatch and Kennedy and those types of friendships really are gone. We don't have the opportunities. When you look at the United States Senate and what the United States Senate used to be and what it has been in our history, and the incredible things that the Senate has done, I don't think you could accomplish it right now. You couldn't pass a civil rights bill. You couldn't pass a voting rights bill.
And everyone feels justified in taking that next step because they immediately look back and say,
and you can blame
Harry
somebody
Reid
else.
did this. Well,
But the thing is, the Senate has always been a place where it was the least of the political, between the House and the Senate. The House was all, and that's what the founders intended. The House was always supposed to be more of a free-for-all. The Senate was supposed to be, dignified and having quorum and everything. But we're not seeing that now, and I think that's what's unfortunate. I think both parties are to blame for this. We can't just blame the Republicans. I think Kirk mentioned Harry Reid. When McConnell wasn't allowing any of the federal judges to be sworn in or even voted on, that's when Harry Reid and the Democrats changed the 60 vote rule to a minimum or a simple majority, and that's where we are now. And the Democrats can say, well, we wouldn't have done that. We don't know, because the reality is the Republicans are doing it.
Well, and we do remember at that time McConnell warning Harry Reid, be careful what you're doing here because of what can happen down the road, just like you two gentlemen are talking about now. Where does it go from here?
It's not a good direction, because the separation of powers is really what has been, fundamentally, has separated us from other countries.
The interesting thing is that for President Trump, who, if nothing else, is really good at kind of narcissistic self-preservation, the best thing he could probably do is somehow let this slip just beyond the election, so that way, now of course with early voting it makes it a little tougher, but it would make kind of the more pragmatic Republicans who have a difficult time with Trump to say, I wasn't going to vote for him, but now I'm not really voting for him, I'm voting for Amy Barrett or something like that.
I'm glad you bring that up, because back in 2016 we saw that same thing where the Supreme Court came to the top priority of a lot of Republicans who were struggling with voting for the president.
I think most,
and we may be in that exact same
most
spot.
pragmatic Republicans who were adamantly opposed to Trump as he was coming through that field of 16, and they finally made the decision to vote for him over Clinton. Obviously, they didn't like Clinton. That made it easier. But their number one reason on the for side was federal judiciary.
And they really liked that list that he put out early. Remember
Right.
that in 2016? Should Biden do that right now, Charlie? Should he put out a list saying, this is who I would pick for the Supreme Court?
At this point, you know, with 40-something days or 39 days to the election, I don't know. I think that it should have happened earlier if you were going to do it. I think it's probably a little bit late now. But really, you know, we have to get back to the point where the Supreme Court is it's not a political body. I mean, the whole purpose of having lifetime judges is because it was to avoid the politics. And unfortunately, we're starting to see. And but it's, you know, and it started. I don't know if it started with Bork, but you know, where you have a lot of very direct, you know, conversations and debates about specific judges. The system has become much more political.
Kirk, question for you.
Yes.
Back in 2016, President Obama put forward Merrick Garland. A lot of Republicans liked him. He was considered a pretty moderate pick. Knowing what we're seeing today and these future consequences that you're talking about, should the Republicans have just moved forward with Merrick Garland?
If you're a pure Republican, then no. Merrick Garland was probably the best judge a Democratic president could have put forth. He's relatively centrist, reasonable. On a few issues, he actually leans a little probably right. A very decent man by all accounts. But I think to most Republicans, the best judge that Obama would nominate would be worse than the worst that a Republican could nominate. And so they had the votes, and so they didn't do it. The biggest problem the Republicans have is not that they did it. They probably should have just said what now Senator Lee is saying now is President has the right to nominate, Senate has the right for advice and consent. Obama did his job with Garland, we did ours, done. But instead you have people like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio who tried to make it this big moralistic, let the voters decide, and now it lays the hypocrisy.
And we have all the video to look back on from 4 years ago.
Well, and they even more than that, they said, you know, use my words against me. Right. And then they get mad when the media does that. It's kind of like read my lips, like, you know, you got to be pretty sure when you throw that type of gauntlet out.
Charlie, I want to ask you about a point that Kirk just brought up, in that Senator Lee is saying, look, he put forward Garland, we did our advice and consent, and we turned him down. Did they really do that?
No, they didn't. I mean, that is completely false. And to Kirk's point, own it. You know, if you want to politicize something, then own it. You know, and I think you're starting to see some of them doing that now. But you know, you can't you know, try to make a process that has become politicized into something, you know, acting like it's normal operating procedure.
Kirk, are you okay with Senator Lee saying now we did do our advice and consent?
Yeah, and as far as at least the way he's defining it now, I agree that it's evolved for basically every Republican since 2016. But the Constitution says X, and we are doing X. But it was a pure power play that the Republicans did in 16. There was nothing moralistic about it. There was nothing about we should let the voters decide. It was, they had the votes to stop it, and they did, and now they've got the votes to get one, and they're going to use it.
And that's the point that President Trump is making the most. Charlie, if this were flipped, would we be seeing the same thing?
I don't think so.
If the Democrats
I honestly don't think so. And I think that the Democrats are going. I think you will start seeing, you know, a change in Democratic elected officials. I think that, you know, by and large, you look at Merrick Garland, for example. I mean, that's a perfect example because he is a moderate. He is a centrist, and everyone that Trump is talking about is not. Okay. And so if the process is going to be political, just own it.
Okay, you know, we have about 20 seconds left. Kirk, I'll give you the last word. If the tables were turned, would we be going through the same thing?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we've seen back and forth with the Senate over the last certainly decade, is each side, when they have when they have a little advantage, they take it. And the customs of the Senate that used to prevail upon our worst instincts are gone. And so we've just seen both parties basically do the wrong thing.
We had so many other things we needed to get to, but we took all of our time on that one. But that was a great conversation, gentlemen. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it. And
Thank you.
Stay with
Glenn.
us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.